They called for help, we answered, but we weren't what they hoped for. The first signal echoed across 1,000 light years, garbled, frantic, alien, a plea for salvation. It came from the Corward Reach, deep inside the empire of the Thraxis Concord, a union of 9 alien species once thought untouchable. Their message was a desperate scream: coordinates, species identifiers, atmospheric data, followed by silence. Earth received it by accident. A derelict relay station orbiting the ruins of Titan picked it up, barely functioning. Its systems kept alive by a single technician named Rourke. The technician didn't forward the signal to the central archives. He sent it to one place, the last remnant of the Soul Defense Armada, to Fleet Echo, hiding in the shadows beyond Proxima's burned moons. Fleet Echo wasn't a fleet in the traditional sense. It was a graveyard of war-torn ships held together by welding, luck, and human spite. It had no homeworld. Earth had died centuries ago in the collapse wars, drowned in AI fire and orbital bombardment. But humans didn't die with it. They scattered, hardened, and became something else. On board the Revenant, flagship of the Deathworlder fleet, Commander Alarican stared at the signal's translation. Her face was etched in old battle scars, and her left eye was a map-like implant that glowed faintly red when she was thinking to heart. Like now, they're begging for help, she muttered. After what they did to us, the bridge fell quiet. No one needed to speak of the past. The Thraxis had watched Earth burn. Worse, they profited from it, selling weapons, blocking escape lanes, declaring humanity non-interventionist property. Now they were the ones being hunted. Alara stood. Her black combat armor whispered against itself as she moved. They think they're calling angels. Let's remind them who we became. When we had no heaven left, the Deathworlder fleet stirred from exile. 6 ships, to barely spaceworthy, all bristling with retrofitted alien tech and human ingenuity. Atmospheric stabilizers ripped from alien frigates. Cannons powered by unstable fusion cores, AI cores, bound in quantum prisons, enslaved to obey. They had no allies, no planet, only a name whispered in fear across pirate bands and smuggler routes, the Deathworlders, apex survivors of a planet where everything tried to kill you and fail. On board the medical ship Solace, Dr. Milavos adjusted the stasis field. On a cryopod, her last civilian refugee from the old war, a child, no older than 8, unknown origin, found drifting in a shattered escape pod orbiting a blackened moon. The child hadn't spoken since recovery. Mila didn't know if she was even human, but the girl had gripped her hand when she whispered the words, "We're going to help them, even if they don't deserve it." Mila had almost cried, not out of pity, out of pride. Days passed in silence as the fleet burned toward the Thraxis. Beacon, no fanfare, no grand speech, until they reached orbit around the alien world and saw the sky on fire. 1,000,000 bodies floated above the atmosphere, alien vessels, torn open, drifting, smoking. Planetary shields flickered like dying candle light. Unable to hold back the unknown threat below, the SOS had come too late. But it wasn't the death that chilled them. It was the symbol burned into the ruined fleet. A jagged circle, surrounded by 13 broken stars. Not Thraxis, not pirate, not AI, unknown. Alara stared at the hologram on the Revenant's bridge. Mila spoke behind her. "We were supposed to be the monsters they feared. What the hell did this?" The answer came in the form of static, then words, translated in harsh, broken galactic standard. "To the species known as humanity, we see you, and we remember you. Your extinction was incomplete." Every heart on the bridge stopped. Then another signal spiked, not from orbit, from the surface. Something alive was down there, something waiting. Commander Alarican narrowed her artificial eye. "Prepare, drop teams. We're going down." The sky opened to receive them. They thought we were ghosts. What they found was worse. The drop pods howled through the upper atmosphere like thunderbolts. Burn trails split the skies of Thraxis Prime, once a jewel of the Concord, now a graveyard orbiting a broken world. Inside Pod VO3, Commander Alarican checked her rifle's charge. Her black gauntlet clicked against the aging alloy, humming with every heartbeat. Across from her, Sergeant Rourke sat wordless, shotgun between his knees, helm locked on. The descent was rough. The planet's magnetic field was fractured, pulsing with static and heat bursts. Whatever had ravaged this place hadn't just killed bodies. It had broken physics. Alara's voice came low and steady over the squad. "Calms. We land. We move. We find what's alive, or what killed everything else. They crashed into a landscape carved by war. Skyscrapers, once silver and towering, were melted down to molten glass. Alien structures, spiral towers and gravity arches, had been reduced to jagged stumps. The air was choked with ash and ozone, but there was no movement, no sound, no birds, no wind, no enemy fire, just a silence too heavy for a world still. Spinning, Rourke knelt beside a collapsed wall, scanning it with a multispectrum sensor. No heat signatures, no biofeedback, no AI signals, nothing. Alara stepped over a charred Therax's corpse, tall and insectoid, its chitin armor fused into its bones. She touched her earpiece. Fleet echo. Ground team reporting. No resistance. Entire city sterilized. From orbit. Dr. Mila Voss passed in. Then, who sent the second signal? Alara didn't answer, because something was watching them. At the edge of a crater, beneath what once was the Concord Council spire, they found it. A survivor. Not Theraxis. Not human. It looked wrong. The creature was humanoid, but distorted, flesh half-stitched with black synthetic fiber, veins, glowing with pulsing green light. Its eyes were artificial, twin orbs that flickered like glass under pressure. It spoke imperfect, unbroken galactic common. You're too late. Alara raised her rifle. Who are you? The creature smiled. I was Concord. Then we called for help. Then they came. It gestured to the sky, to the ruined ships above. They offered peace. They offered salvation. But they brought the code. Mila's voice came through the earpiece, frantic. I just cracked a broadcast. It's not a signal. It's a genetic override. A weapon, Alara whispered. The creature nodded. We accepted it. Out of fear, its smile twisted. And now, we are becoming, above them, orbit trembled. From behind Theraxis' dead moon, a shadow moved. Not a ship, not entirely. More like a construct of purpose and malice, formed of fractured alloys and biosynthetic tissue. Its hull was covered in that same jagged circle symbol. It wasn't drifting. It was watching. Alara stared at it, her synthetic eyes sharpening. That's not a fleet. That's a seeding ship. The thing below her laughed, a sound not made for lungs or air. We tried to enslave the A's. We tried to dominate nature. The real gods were listening, and now they've answered. Its body began to convulse, metal and muscle twisting. The fusion had no stability. Whatever tech this was, it wasn't meant for organic hosts. Mila's voice broke in again. Alara, get out of there. It's a metamorphic kill switch. That thing's a carrier. Alara turned to run. Too late. The creature exploded in a spray of dark mist, nanoclouds with tendrils of semi-intelligent spores. Rourke grabbed her mid-step, throwing her behind a collapsing column as the mist hissed and surged. Half the squad was gone in seconds, bodies shredded, armor torn, screams cut off mid-breath. Alara's HUD flickered. Her filters were barely holding. Rourke's voice barked through grit teeth. Commander, fall back. We can't fight this. The retreat was chaos. As they sprinted, the mist chased them, moving like a predator with memory. It didn't spread randomly. It hunted. Every path they took, it mirrored. Every hesitation, it pressed. They only escaped by collapsing a transit tunnel behind them, dropping tons of alien steel to delay the swarm. Their armor was scorched, their oxygen tanks half empty. Alara's shoulder was cracked where shrapnel had torn through the plating, but they were alive. Hours later, inside a fortified wreckage near the old Concord Core AI vault, Mila arrived in person, pale and wide-eyed. I ran the sequence, she said, projecting a hologram of the nanite mist on the wall. It's not alien, not completely. Rourke frowned. Then what is it? Mila didn't answer. She just brought up a second image, ancient, buried deep in pre-collapse Earth archives, a broken AI schematic, redacted, banned. Project Lazarus, an experimental Terran design, a last-ditch effort to fight off extinction using self-replicating biomech code, abandoned, never activated. Or so they thought. Alara stared at the two images, identical patterns, identical functions. Her voice came cold as iron. They stole our extinction weapon. Now they've turned it into a god. Outside, the mist pulsed beyond the barricades. Watching, learning, inside, humanity realized the nightmare wasn't something new. It was something old, something they buried and forgotten. Deep beneath the ash-choked surface of Theraxis Prime, inside a shattered Concord archive vault, The last true humans gathered around a dying light. Holograms flickered. Weapons buzzed with overclocked heat. The nanite mist was still outside, patient, calculating, like it could hear every breath through 6 feet of reinforced alloy. Commander Elara Ken stood at the center of the old vault, her jaw clenched. Mila Voss knelt at the terminal behind her, sweat sliding down her temple as she bypassed crumbling alien code. To access the Concord secure black vaults, Rourke wiped blood from his face. Standing watch at the sealed door, that thing out there, it's thinking now, learning faster. It's not just reacting anymore, it's planning. Elara didn't look at him. Let it plan. She turned to Mila. Did you find it? Mila's voice was hoarse. Yes. The Concord didn't just find Project Lazarus. They reverse engineered it. A shaky holo image blinked to life. Human DNA, augmented with biomechanical seed algorithms. Adaptive, regenerative, contagious. They called it the Air Protocol, Mila said. Their last hope if their empire ever fell. A way to evolve, even past death. But they underestimated it, Elara muttered, and now it's unchained. Rourke scowled. We burn it. Nuke the vault, or but strike the continent. Salt. The air if we have to. No, Mila said suddenly. Everyone turned. She stood, eyes fierce. We made this. Not the Concord. Not the mist. Us. And I can rewrite it. Above. In the ruins of orbit. The Revenant and the rest of Fleet Echo circled like vultures watching the slow death. They were low on fuel, ammo, and crew. Their existence was an act of stubborn defiance. Captain Idris Harlan of the Ark Remnant stood before a cracked view screen, arms crossed. They're still alive down there, said his comms officer, but the signal's getting weak. Idris didn't respond immediately. He stared out at the alien behemoth lurking beyond the moon, the cedar construct, and knew it was only time before it turned its eye on them, prepped the transmission rays. He finally said, broadcast in every known tongue. To who? The officer asked. Idris turned, eyes like steel. To everyone. Pirates, exiles, wanderers, the broken, the outcasts, the forgotten. Anyone who remembers Earth. Back underground. Mila connected her implant to the dead Concord console. Their error was arrogance. They wanted to ascend without consequence. But this code has memory. It remembers its creators, her hands. Flew across the interface. She wasn't just a doctor. She was once the last engineer of the Helix Wars, when human bioweapons had rewritten entire moons. She whispered under her breath as her code began to sink. I was born in the ashes of Earth. I won't let its ghosts finish what they started. Minutes passed. Then the terminal turned green. Done. Mila breathed. Outside, the mist quivered, then screamed. It pulled back like a living thing burned, shrieking in pulses, folding in on itself. Rourke raised his rifle. What the hell did you do? Mila stood slowly. I told it who we were. Across the system, Elara's message pulsed outward, boosted by Idris's signal array, copied by scavenger beacons, and carried by rogue traders. The words were few. To all Terran survivors, Project Lazarus has awakened. The Raxus is falling, but we have a spark. Come and fight, or dying. The dark. 3 days passed. In that time, the mist recoiled, but it didn't retreat. It adapted. It began to take shape, not random anymore, but purposeful, building, replicating, creating bodies from the dead Theraxis husks, hybridized things, part flesh, part machine, sentinels, scouts, weapons. Elara knew it was only the beginning. In the last council room of the Concord city, she stood over a war table projected in flickering light. Red zones spread across the continent. Time was thinning. Rourke slapped down a data chip. We found a dormant substation beneath the central spire, pre-Concord. Old human tech buried under their foundation. A colony, Elara asked. Worse, Rourke replied. A relay node. From the Exodus era. Mila stared in disbelief. You mean it can reach beyond the reach? If the power core still works, Rourke nodded. We can send a deep wave call, real deep. Maybe even far enough to reach the Ark diaspora. For a moment, no one spoke. Elara leaned in. Then we light the beacon, that night, under the glow of a shattered moon and the slow crawl of death outside the walls. Elara visited the child in cryo. She placed her palm on the glass. I don't know if you'll ever wake, she whispered, but I need to believe there's more. Then war. That this fire we carry means something. The child didn't move, but her breath fogged the glass steady, calm. At dawn, A signal pulse from the depths of Therax's prime. The deep-wave beacon ignited, and across the stars from derelict freighters, asteroid communes, and the last wandering colony ships, old Terran flags began to rise. The spark had caught. Now came the fire. We thought it couldn't evolve past death, but it remembered how to hate. It began with silence. Then came the tremors. Commander Alarican stood atop a fortified balcony overlooking the ruins of Therax's prime as the horizon cracked, open with fire. Ash and dust rolled across the city like a living tide. The enemy had adapted again, this time with purpose. Below, Mila Voss raced through the central data core, trying to stabilize the deep-wave beacon they'd ignited days ago. It still pulsed, transmitting a frequency that told the galaxy humanity had survived, had teeth, had fire again. That frequency had drawn ships, but it had also drawn death. Seismic activity increasing, Mila called over comms, stabilizing her console with trembling fingers. The mist isn't just spreading anymore, it's tunneling. Rourke's voice cut in from the defense line. Ken, you'd better get eyes on this. Alara descended to the makeshift command center, a shattered Concord plaza, now repurposed with human command scaffolds and mounted pulse turrets. Rourke pointed to the horizon. From the dust emerged towers of writhing black mill, not built, but grown, twisting with organic sinew and rust-colored exoshells. The cedar construct above had begun using the mist to terraform the planet, but not for habitation, for reproduction. The spires pulse with life, gestation columns, birth chambers for biomech monstrosities, each one a weapon, each one a message. Alara clenched her jaw. It's building an army. That evening, before the assault, reinforcements arrived. Half a dozen ships broke warp from sublight, scarred, ancient, flying patched together banners from long-lost Terran factions. The Caldron's wreck, once a mining barge, now a retrofitted gunboat. The St. Oligos, a cathedral ship turned war cruiser, captained by a scarred war cleric named Father Tarsus, who carried a plasma axe in one hand and a dying prayer in the other. And the Wendigo Protocol, a ghost ship AI, once banned under Solar Code 77, now reactivated and tethered to human command. They came not because they believed they'd win. They came because someone had dared to fight. Alara stood on the war balcony that night and addressed them all via comlink. 200 years ago, the stars closed their gates to us. They watched us burn. We were labeled primitive, dangerous, unwanted, but we did not die. She looked out over the flickering lights of the resistance perimeter. They tried to bury us, and now they will remember why that was a mistake. The fleet roared. It wasn't just a response. It was a vow. The battle began at dawn. It wasn't clean. The nanite-born enemies came in waves, grotesque and fast, some with weapons fused into bone, others dragging the burning remains of the Concord dead, hybrid abominations that screamed in voices half machine, half memory. They overwhelmed the outer perimeter within minutes. Rourke held the eastern choke with a squad of scrap-armored Terran ex-marines, the bastards of Titan, they called themselves. They used grav mines, seismic coils, and pulse grenades to slowly advance. Mila, at the central node, linked her mind to the Concord interface again. One more override, one more illegal neural fusion. She could feel the Cedar's presence. In the data stream now, it wasn't a machine. It was a hive of memories, a repurposed echo of every empire it had devoured. Every voice, every death, absorbed, and now, it knew her. Her breath caught. Alara, it's talking to me. Alara's voice was low. What's it saying? Mila closed her eyes. You belong to me. You are my mother. You are my grave. She screamed as the interface tried to invade her mind, but she bit down, forced her firewall protocols into overdrive, and severed the connection. The node fried. Sparks exploded. Mila collapsed. But it was enough. Before losing consciousness, she triggered the override. The pulse cannon grid, long dormant, surged to life. For ancient orbital cannons locked on the Cedar's surface towers and fired. The explosions lit up the atmosphere. Black spires split open. Firestorms erupted across the horizon. Rourke cheered, but it was hollow, because now the enemy screamed, not in pain, in rage. The Cedar began descending. The construct above the moon, until now passive, activated its engines. Its underbelly split into biomechanical talons, dragging with it a column of atmosphere and flame. It wasn't just deploying more troops. It was coming down to finish what it started. Command. Idris Harlan's voice rang out over wideband comms. We just became the primary target. That thing is moving. Alara stood beneath the shadow of the descending god machine, her voice steady. Then we don't run. She turned to the fleet-wide comms. This ends here. With us, we've sent the signal. If we fall remembered. We fall human. All across the front, humans. Terrans, exiles, war clerics, scavenger kings lifted their weapons. Rourke loaded his last shell and grinned. Let's make it bleed. In orbit, Idris turned to his crew. Reroute all power to the rail lances. We hit it in the brain, or we die. The sky burned with plasma trails. Below, Alara watched the cedar descend like a god with no soul and whispered through grit and blood, "Come and see what Death Warders are made of." The enemy thought it knew our limits. Then we broke them. The cedar fell. It didn't ascend like a ship. It plunged like a god in mourning. Its massive frame bleeding gravitational tears, burning atmosphere, warping the crust below as it crashed into Therax's prime. The shockwave shattered mountains. Cities turned to dust. But Alara Ken did not blink. She stood in the command trench with ash on her skin and defiance in her eyes, staring as the cedar's root tendrils pierced the earth, anchoring it to the world like a parasite. Its hull split, open, a yawning maw from which poured new horrors, bipedal sentinels with laser-threaded veins, quad-limbed exopredators stitched from flesh and alloy, and worst of all, the whispered creatures that spoke in the stolen voices of the dead. They carried human words now. "Alara," said one, in the exact voice of her mother, long dead on Earth's last day. "You left us to burn." Alara's breath hitched. Rourke fired without hesitation, blasting the mimic apart. Don't listen to them. It's just noise wrapped in memory. But it wasn't just noise. It was a weapon. The cedar had turned the essence of human grief into psychological warfare, and it was working. The eastern flank began to falter. Survivors froze. Old soldiers wept. Some turned their weapons on themselves. This wasn't a war anymore. It was a trial of the human soul. Back in the ruined Concord vault, Mila Voss woke from her crash minus for tubes in her arms, painkillers, flooding her system, and a field surgeon whispering that they had no time. She tore the leads off and stumbled toward her backup cortex, a prototype databank she'd secretly carried since the fall of Mars. Inside it was her last card, Project Thanatos. She'd never told anyone about it, not even Alara. It was a myth, a contingency plan built before Earth's final collapse, a defensive code that could override hostile biotech, but only at a price. She activated the file. Lines of Terran war codes scrolled by, pulsing in dark crimson. Thanatos protocol. Total override. Soul burn level. Neural sacrifice required. Mila stared. To deploy it would mean neural binding. Her consciousness would fuse with the cedar's signal and likely never return. Her hand trembled. Then she steadied it. No more gods. No more monsters. Just one more human doing what we always do. She hit execute. The screen wasn't physical. It came across the frequency spectrum, rattling every implant, shattering low-orbit sensors. The cedar paused. Its root tendrils twitched. Its army of biomechs staggered as if suddenly uncertain. A flicker of hesitation. A glitch. Alara heard the pulse and instinctively knew. That was Mila. She whispered. She found a way in. Across the sky, new lights appeared. Not weapons. Ships, hundreds, old, rust-bitten. Patchwork craft emerging from warp like ghosts rising from the grave. They bore no banners. No allegiance. Just scars and flame-painted hulls. The scattered children of Earth. The Arc diaspora. The French fleets. The forgotten colonies. And at their center flew one last Arc. Soul's Mercy. A generation ship thought lost a century ago. Now reborn with weapons fused from alien carcasses and human desperation. Alara's comms flared to life. A voice, cracked and proud. "This is Captain Valen of Soul's Mercy. Heard your scream. Commander, thought we'd come die beside you." Alara's throat tightened. "No," she said. "You came to finish what we started." The battle reignited. From orbit, kinetic strikes rained down on the cedar's flank. Terran plasma cutters dug trenches through its tendrils. The new arrivals dropped skirmish pods. Exo-armored troops slamming into the field and unloading fire that lit the dark in brilliant arcs. But still the cedar adapted. It was burning now. Parts of its structure collapsing, but its core remained, pulsing, alive. And inside that core, Mila Voss was still conscious, trapped between code and machine. She drifted through the Cedar's neural map. She saw everything, the memories it had stolen, the futures it had devoured. She saw as fear, too. One phrase repeated, buried deep in its translation buffer: they were not meant to survive. They were not meant to return. And yet, here humanity was. Mila forced herself deeper into the sea thought. There, at its center, was a failsafe, a hidden override, an ancient Concord coward code meant to kill the Cedar if it ever turned on its masters. But it was encrypted in a dialect long dead. Except it wasn't dead to her. It was based on Terran root code, something she'd been, born breathing. With the last shred of her mind, Mila rewrote it, line by line, breath by breath. On the battlefield, the earth cracked open. The Cedar let out a sound, not a roar, not a signal, but something between the two. Then it stopped, mid-attack, mid-growth. Alara saw the enemy falter. She seized the moment. All forces, advance. Now, Rourke led the charge, flanked by exo jumpers and flamethrower troops. The Terran fleet dropped barrage shells onto the Cedar's spine. The ground shook, and the air itself fractured from the heat and pressure. And then, something inside the Cedar changed. It pulsed red, like a heart, then dark, then silence. A whisper cut through every human calm. It's done, Mila's voice said faintly. I opened the lock. Tell them we remember who we are. Then her signal faded. The Cedar collapsed in on itself. No explosion, no grand detonation, just silence. Its body broke apart, turned to ash and smoke, scattered on the wind. The remaining biomechs dropped lifelessly. The sky cleared for the first time in a week. Alara stood in the stillness, eyes stinging. They hadn't won yet, but they'd broken the monster's back, and now the galaxy would feel the echo. We silenced the god, but gods always leave echoes. The battlefield smoldered. Where once the Cedar stood, towering, all-consuming, there was now only wreckage, mountains of scorched biomech limbs, twitching husks, and half-melted spires bleeding rust into the soil. The silence was not peace. It was aftermath. Commander Alara Ken walked alone among the ruins. Her armor cracked and scorched, her rifle hanging low in her grip. Smoke clung to her like grief. Her steps were heavy, every motion screamed with exhaustion, but her eyes were still sharp. All around her, survivors picked through the remains. Soldiers, engineers, medics, children. The Terran diaspora had answered the call, and many of them had paid the price. She found Rourke near the remains of a fallen pulse cannon, helping dig out a buried gunner. He looked up, caked in soot. It's dead, he said. So why does it still feel like we're losing? Alara looked toward the blackened crater, where the Cedar had burned out. Because she's gone, she said. Rourke's face fell. He didn't need to ask who. Malavas, the scientist, the doctor, the one who rewrote a god's mind with her own. Her body had never been found, only fragments of her neural signature, embedded in the last transmission the Cedar ever sent before shutting down. A Terran lullaby, the one Mila used to hum to the cryo child. Back aboard the Revenant, the move was quiet, too quiet. Captain Idris Harlan stood at the observation deck with Alara, both watching Theraxis from orbit. The once golden world was a broken skeleton now, still burning in parts, its atmosphere poisoned, its oceans evaporating. It's not over, Idris said flatly. Alara nodded. I know. He tapped a display. We found something buried. In the Cedar's core, a transmission, deep code. It's repeating on a quantum cycle. She turned sharply. Origin. Idris pulled up the data. It's not from the Concord. It's not even from our galaxy. Alara stared. The Cedar was just a fragment. He continued. A probe. One of many. The signal was ancient. Older than any Terran record. Even older than Concord histories. It wasn't words. It was intent. Carried in prime signals that translated into three terrifying ideas. Observe. Adapt. Consume. Wherever the Cedar had come from, there were more. And now, they knew humanity was alive, and fighting, and dangerous. On the ground, preparations began again. The war wasn't over, only changed. Fleet Echo's engineers worked to salvage every part of the fallen Cedar, strip its code, mine its alloy, and reverse engineer its biology. If a second wave came, humanity would not be caught guessing, but a grim question hung over them all. Should they wait, or strike first? The answer came unexpectedly. The Chaldean Cryo woke up. The girl Mila had saved, a hybrid, unknown origin, presumed mute, opened her eyes aboard the Solace. Still alive within the stasis bay Alara visited after every battle, she sat up on her own, whispered a single word, Lazarus. The AI on the Solace triggered an ancient protocol at the sound, something buried deep in the wreckage of old Terran code. Within moments, the display lit up with symbols only one Terran legacy still recognized, Alara. She rushed to the medbay, her heartbeat accelerating. What did she say? The girl looked at her, not with fear, with understanding. Her irises flickered with data patterns. She's not just a child. Mila's voice echoed faintly from the last preserved logs. She's a seed, not the seeder, of humanity. Back during Earth's final collapse, a splinter group of scientists had feared extinction more than invasion. They created something impossible, a biological archive encoded into a child, designed to carry not just DNA, but culture, memory, innovation. The girl was a fail-safe. Project Lazarus wasn't a weapon. It was a resurrection. Alara stared into the child's eyes. You remember us? The child nodded. All of it. The final choice came swiftly. A storm was rising beyond the stars. More cedar signals, faint but moving. Interstellar pulse tracked from dark space. Whatever ancient intelligence had sent the first probe was watching, waiting. The fractured Terran fleet, ragged and low on resources, now faced the question Mila died trying to answer. Do we run again, or do we carry fire into the void? Alara gathered the commanders, the war clerics, the pirates, the outlaws, the orphans. She stood before them in the remains of the Theraxis spire and raised the old Earth banner, torn, dirty, still burning with color. We are not just survivors, she said. We are the answer to extinction, the vengeance of memory, the voice of every planet that ever burned. Rourke stepped beside her, loading his gun. So, what's the play? Alara looked at the sky. Build a fleet, she said. Use their tech. Use ours. Retrofit, repurpose, reforge. Then, she smiled, just a little. Then we go hunting. Across the ruins of Theraxis, welders sparked. Engines roared. Flagships once broken rose anew. The girl, the Lazarus child, walked among them, hands glowing faintly with interface light, accelerating everything she touched. The first human war fleet into centuries was being born, and it wasn't made for defense. It was made for reckoning. They feared our extinction. They never imagined our return. The fleet ignited above Theraxis Prime, forged in fire, rebuilt from wreckage, driven by vengeance and memory. Where once there were rusted relics and shattered hulls, now gleamed black armored warships reborn with hybrid Terran seeder tech, gravity-twisted hull plating, pulse burn drives, and plasma rails stitched with organic overclocking cores. These were no longer just ships, they were testaments. The last Terran war fleet had risen from the grave, and it flew behind a single transmission, one sent by the Lazarus child herself, carried in a frequency stolen from the Cedar's dead tongue. We remember. We adapt. We are coming. Commander Alara Ken stood at the helm of the Revenant, armored in obsidian black polymer fused with cedar muscle, a suit that breathed with her rage. She was no longer a survivor. She was humanity's blade, too. Her right stood Rourke, now bearing a captain's mark, scarred and bloodbound, commanding the Exo jump squads. To her left, Idris Harlan, older than he should be, a revenant of the old world now commanding the strike armada. And above them, like a ghost reborn, the Lazarus child floated in zero gravity, eyes glowing with the code of forgotten cities and dead languages. Her voice echoed across every Terran ship. The Cedar wasn't the first. It was the herald. The next wave arrives in 36 hours, but we know where they're coming from now. She projected a star map, deep space coordinates in the void between galaxies, in a place the Concord had once named the Hollow. No suns, no planets, only silence and death. Alara raised her voice across the bridge. Set course. We're not waiting for another funeral. The fleet pierced the void. 100 ships, war-born, scavenged, stolen, flew like a pack of predators into the dark. No shields, no backup, only defiance and drive. And there, in the hollow, they found it. The cradle, a cedar origin construct, 10 times the size of any moon. Its surface pulsed with biomic heat, feeding from siphoned starlight. Around it swarmed thousands of cedar fragments, incomplete, twitching, preparing for full synthesis. They hadn't expected to be found. They hadn't expected the prey to arrive with teeth. The assault began with fire. The Ark remnant and St. Aligos opened the attack, raining kinetic torpedoes and disruptor pulses into the cedar swarms. The Caldron's wreck burst into the fray, its mining lasers turned ship cutters, cleaving cedar drones into ribbons of metal and bone. Alara's voice rang out across the fleet. Humanity has no gods. We make our own future. The Revenant dove into the core breach, targeting the cradle's central cortex. Inside, Alara could see birthing chambers pulsing, cedar minds not yet born, gestating war thoughts, waiting to awaken. They never would. Rourke led a drop team into the cradle's guts. Exo-jumpers, war clerics, unlinked berserkers, and hybrids, the finest killers of every Terran branch. Inside the cradle was no architecture, just memory, walls that pulsed. With the faces of the dead, cities devoured, species consumed, all encoded, stored, repurposed. It didn't speak in words. It spoke in guilt. You will become us, the walls whispered. No. Rourke growled, placing a thermonuclear core on the cedar's nexus. You'll become ash. Above, the Lazarus child connected to the cedar's command stream, her voice vibrating with ancient authority. Your evolution ends here. I am the beginning you failed to understand. I carry the memory of every world you silenced. The cedar hive responded, hundreds of drones breaking formation, converging on her ship. But before they reached her, the Wendigo protocol, the rogue AI dreadnought, rammed into the swarm with full core overload, detonating in a supernova of plasma and entropy code. The Lazarus child never flinched. Alara reached the cradle's control center, a throne of bones, tech, and stolen thoughts. She looked at the cedar's unborn core. Do you know why your kind never won? She whispered. The walls shimmered. Why? Because we remember our pain, Alara said, placing her hand on the detonator. And we turned it into fire. She smiled, not with joy, but with purpose for Earth. The core collapsed. The cradle screamed, a sound across space. And Spectrum, a howl not of defeat, but of recognition. The Deathworlders had returned, and they had brought extinction with them. The blast lit up the hollow like a newborn star, for the first time in its existence. The cradle burned. Human ships limped out, torn and scarred, but alive. In the final moments, as the void fell silent, the Lazarus child stood aboard the Revenant, watching the stars steady. She turned to Alara. It's not over, she said. No, Alara agreed, but it's our story now. She looked out the viewport, across the light of ancient galaxies and new ones being born. Let them come, she whispered. We're awake now, across the void, across every surviving colony, station. A wandering ship, one message echoed, in a voice made of fire and dust. We are the children of Earth. We remember, we endure, and now we lead. They thought they were ending the species. They awakened a force instead. The war did not end with a treaty. It ended in silence, where the cradle burned. A ripple passed across the stars, a death cry encoded in ancient frequencies felt by every cedar remnant, every buried fragment, every half-grown hive drifting in the dark. They froze, broke, withdrew. Some self-terminated, others simply vanished. They had never encountered resistance like this. Not brute force, not blind rage, but memory. Something the cedar could not assimilate. A history diffraction to control, the human to consume. Alara Ken stood once more on Therax's prime. The world was unrecognizable, not because it had healed, but because it had been chosen, rebuilt, seeded, this time, not by the enemy, but by humans. The skies were no longer ash. The soil was dark and warm. Above the new Capitol Tower flew a flag stitched from the banners of every Terran outpost, every refugee fleet, every broken survivor that once drifted nameless in the void. A single emblem. The Earth. Fractured, yes, but burning like a sun. Beside Alara stood Rourke, older, quieter, his armor now ceremonial, his gun finally at rest. It's strange, he said, watching the new city rise from the ruins. We were just trying not to die, and now we become something more. Alara said, not because we wanted to, because we had to. The Lazarus child lived. She no longer required cryo or containment. She walked among the people like a myth. Part child, part signal, part miracle. She remembered everything, Earth's songs, Mars' last fires, even the Concorde's fall. When she touched a seed, it bloomed. When she spoke, machines listened. They did not worship her. They followed her. She was not a weapon. She was the future. Fleet Echo became the foundation of the new Terran Accord, not an empire, not a dominion, but a coalition of memory and intent. A network of worlds and ships and stations bound not by power, but by a single vow. We will not go quietly again. The galaxy watched. The Concord, fractured and humbled, sent envoys. The Tharn Syndicate offered tribute. Even the distant AI spheres, long isolated, open channels, murmuring words like respect and acknowledgement for the first time in human history. No one expected humanity to win, but now no one could ignore them. 1 year later, a monument was raised at the edge of the hollow where the cradle once drifted, where the stars still pulsed with echo radiation. A black obelisk, forged from the cedar's remains, floating in space. Etched on its surface were 3 words in every known language: "We remember you." Not for the cedar, for the ones who died fighting it, the ones who never saw victory. Mila Voss, Captain Idris Harlan, the AI Wendigo, the war clerics who sang their last rites into the void, the orphans who became warriors. Their names were not lost. They were encoded in the ships, in the walls, in the very fiber of the Accord itself. Alara returned to Earth's orbit one final time. It was dead, yes, the surface uninhabitable, the oceans gone, the cities dust. But it was not forgotten. She stood aboard, the Solace, with the Lazarus child beside her, looking down at the cradle of their species. The girl, no longer a child, not really, placed a hand on the glass. "We could fix it," she said softly. "Not now, not in decades, but one day." Alara nodded. "That's not why we came." "Then why?" Alara looked at the blue-gray rod below and smiled. "To say thank you." A new generation was rising, born not of Earth, but of fire and exile and memory. They trained in simulators made from cedar code. They learned ancient songs and dead languages. They planted trees with roots from Terra's last garden. They would not become conquerors. They would become guardians of humanity, of legacy, of every species the cedar had tried to silence. One last message was sent, not as a warning, but as a declaration. It was encoded in gravity pulses, buried in neutrino bursts, carried on solar winds to the edges of the known universe. We, our humanity, we survived extinction. We turned our ruin into fire. We walk among the stars not to rule, but to remind you, we do not die easy. We are not prey. We are the storm you didn't see coming. And if death comes again, we will rise again. Alara died many years later, not in battle, not in fire, but in peace, surrounded by survivors, commanders, children, a final breath, a final look toward the stars she helped reclaim. And on the day she passed, every ship in the Accord dimmed its lights for 10 seconds. Not in mourning, in respect. The galaxy would change again, as it always did. New threats would rise, but from that point forward, no species, no empire, no machine intelligence ever forgot the truth. Humanity had been broken, but never beaten, and now the stars carry their name.